Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre webinar, the latest in our series today, talking about cultural license to operate in the blue economy. My name is Greg Johannes. I'm chair of the Blue Economy CRC, and I'll be the host today. And I'm really delighted to host this particular webinar because this is a subject matter that I'm quite passionate about. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional First Nations custodians of the many lands we come together from today. I'm on the land of the Muinina people in Tasmania, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Beyond that, of course, within our CRC, we don't just talk about the traditional custodians of the land, but increasingly, and the work we're going to talk about today has been a driver of that, we talk about First Nations rights, knowledge, and perspectives in relation to the sea. So I also want to acknowledge the deep and ongoing rights, knowledge, perspectives and views that our First Nations communities have when it comes to the sea, be it on the coastline or further offshore, and recognise the importance of working within that framework going forward. For those who don't know the Blue Economy CRC, we were established almost 5 years ago to the day, and we have a 10-year life under the Australian government's CRC program, bringing together more than 40 participants from Australia and around the globe with a focus on performing world-class, collaborative, industry-focused research and training that underpins the growth of the blue economy through increased offshore sustainable aquaculture and renewable energy production. As I said, today's webinar is really about cultural license to operate in the blue economy. And in a sense, it's flipping the script for industry to consider the competitive advantage of working directly alongside First Nations and changing the formula of corporate responsibility so that it's done in a way that recognises rights, aspirations, and knowledge of First Nations people in relation to unlocking the blue economy. We're strongly supportive in the Blue Economy CRC about the importance of an inclusive and equitable approach. And as governments, investors, rights holders, and stakeholders look to the sea as the next economic frontier, there's a renewed focus on ensuring a balanced approach that recognises all rights and interests. So today we'll have a presentation and discussion led by Dr. Cass Hunter, exploring the outcomes from a Trans-Tasman scoping project funded by the CRC to build a cultural licence to operate framework that helps to create the right ecosystem for ethical, equitable, dynamic, and responsible negotiations and discussions customised at the level of place. And for more information on the project, you can go to the Blue Economy CRC's website and see the project page. I'll be facilitating a bit of a Q&A after Cass's presentation, but I really don't want to take any more time than that and segue directly into inviting Dr. Cass Hunter to come in, tell us a little bit about herself, and then take us through the research and the work that's come out of that and the work on licence that she's done. So Cass, over to you.
Thank you. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging country. So I'm based up here in Cairns. I give my respects to Gimwa Wallaby Yidinji and also Yirrkandji traditional owners. And I do extend that respect to the land, seas that you're living and raising the next generation on. And also to my fellow custodians online today, I extend that respect to our elders for our ongoing stewardship over sea country, over reefs, over waters. So it is great to have participants online, and it's good to share the project. So just a little bit about me, and I'll go to acknowledging the team effort across this space, is that where I'm from is up in Yallinji, so about a few hours north of Cairns, and also my grandmother's from Mobiag. I'm really interested in the space of coastal Indigenous livelihoods, and same with the team. You come from a broad range of areas. This has been an Indigenous-led project involving Indigenous researchers from not only Australia but Aotearoa. So as I mentioned, it's a collective team effort. So I do want to acknowledge the work of fellow team members, so Professor Emma Lee, Waitangi, ALBI, and also MIBU. So a big part where we started this project was actually exploring the concept of what corporate responsibility is in terms of the space around the agenda set by the responsibility of corporate, and also ESG. So as a group, we come together to explore the space, but also how can we elevate it? So our initial discussions were, how do we actually start to embed the cultural business ethics within that corporate responsibility agenda? So this is just one diagram that we produced as a team to try to elevate the conversation and bring in the cultural ethics into the space. Also, we understood the challenge. So the underlying big challenge that the project was trying to address, and as Greg mentioned at the beginning, was flipping the script. So how do we help to progress from business as usual within the industry space in terms of a transactional approach to a bit more of a transformational, about that real genuine partnership with First Nations? So next slide, please. So core to our work was building this cultural license to operate framework. So you can see, so as I mentioned in the previous slide, we talked about cultural business ethics. So a big part of the first pillar was based on these mutuality principles, heavily based around how you can ethically work alongside First Nations. Another pillar that's important to the framework is based on integrity. We've got acceptability pillar, we've got co-benefits, we've got agreement, we've got risk and impact, and we've got implementation and evaluation. With this next slide, I'm actually going to unpack it a little bit more for our audience, because it is such core to what this project focused in on. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time. This is probably the slide that I'm probably going to step through a lot, just to give it context. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned pillar one, which is based around the mutuality principles. Now we're going to step into this concept of what integrity is. So integrity is heavily based around partnering with disclosure and within the right authorizing environment. So what that means is how you work honestly and respectfully at place by respectfully working alongside the cultural authority at place. So takeaway message there is at place and the appropriate cultural authority. You can see there one of the key messages coming out is don't go black shopping to get the response you desire. So you can't just work with any traditional owner group. It's actually the cultural authority at place to set up the right legitimacy and the right cultural framing to carry that partnership forward. Now we're going to move on to pillar 3, acceptability. So acceptability is around partnering, where it's not you partner and it's set in and you set and forget. It's about partnering. It's a check-in process. So this is flagging to your partners is that as you build this, you're going to potentially go through a green, orange, red zone where you're going to build your conversation. Is it acceptable or not? And potentially that acceptability is not always locked in, is that you have to keep earning that, and that you can, through a consent process, hit a red flag or a red checkpoint. So the main thing about acceptability is you keep checking your process. Are you going the way you intended? And it's just not a set and forget. So also, as the message said, be prepared for a community not to waste their time in trying to secure. They're going to ask questions. They're going to work through, is this feasible for them? So pillar 4, so the co-benefits. This is core to this whole framework around partnering with co-benefits. And I'll start to unpack it with further slides around what that co-benefit is. But the main message of co-benefits is that there is going to be, rewards and benefits for both parties, First Nations and also industry. It needs to be around a conversation around what co-benefits are. What are the tiers? What is a maximum co-benefit in this? How you design your approach. It says build a relationship that has built with the right infrastructure for the mobility of First Nations. Sorry, even I'm struggling to read that off the screen. So pillar 5, we're going to keep progressing through, is around the agreement making process, around setting up the right goalposts for how you track forward with ethical, equitable, and also sustainable goalposts how you set up that partnership. Risk and benefits, it's about pushing the boundaries, shifting from set and forget to actually you want to stretch and transform. Throughout this whole process, you'll probably hear me talk about this transformation, but we know that to get reward, you need to move through the risk space, but it's actually the combination of risk and rewards in this space. Also, key pillar is around implementation evaluation. Is that as we track along, are we, and I suppose it links in also to acceptability, is that we keep evaluating, are we on the path that we set for? Is everyone okay that we're tracking in the right direction? So it's always important to check your process, evaluate it, and there's always room for improvement along your journey. Next slide, please. So cultural license to operate is one framing, but we also know that through the framework, it's going to have outcomes. So the outcomes of this is that you're going to set up a cultural partnership pathway. So setting up your right ecosystem around it being ethical, equitable, and also about it being responsible is that some of the pillars that are discussed in the previous slide, the outcomes of this is that you're going to set up your process, hopefully around tracking towards what a maximum co-benefit. You're going to be working at place. You're going to be having the right goalposts that you're tracking towards. So we shifted throughout this report our framing around cultural license to the cultural partnership pathway. That is the outcome that you're trying to work towards when First Nations and industry come together to map out that co-benefit space. Also, it's important too, as you build your approach, and I've talked about, if we say we're going to shift from transactional to transformational, it's about, okay, so how is this pathway designed to do that? And you can see on the left-hand side that this is some of what we're trying to embed in the process about how we're trying to transform the space. It's about focusing on the maximum co-benefits. It's around integrity, clarifying performance and checkpoints. It's about making sure we come together in a respectful way, anchoring it in the right principles and practices. So this is just some of the underpinning principles that we're trying to embed in there around what does transforming look like. So if anyone asks questions around the path we're trying to take with transforming it, hopefully this gives a little bit more insight into how we are designing the pathway and framework around that. Next slide, please, Leslie. So with our approach, it's important that as we built the framework, that we seek insights from First Nations, from industry. So it's very important that we held cross-sector engagement across the space. We had open EOI processes to join the engagement. Why the engagements are important? Because we're going to hear insights around lessons learned. We're going to hear around how difficult it is to change mindsets and behaviours. So these engagements were core to the process. Just in the below part, just talks a little bit about the phases that we embedded in. So it's important as a team that we come together to outline what does an initial cultural license to operate framework look like. So as we went out and we talked with our colleagues, talked with different sectors, we're hearing insights and feedbacks in terms of, is this framework set up right? When we go to implement the framework, what do we need to think about? So we not only ground truth our pillars, but we ground truth how we actually implement it, which is where the lessons learned are and how you track with some of the difficulties with working through risk, working through big changes in behaviour, shifting out of business as usual. So it's important through our process that we did that, insights and lessons learnt. Next slide, please, Leslie. So I really want to focus it. When I say cross-sector, this is what we tried to do. So we've got First Nations, invites went to industry, to government, to the corporate responsibility sector, to the research. Also, as we designed our engagement, we designed our workshops, we really want to hear insights around, as I just mentioned, around behaviour, around attitude. So it's important that we step through these components. The fumbles as we go along, the fears, the frustrations. The reason why that is important is because when we come to things like agreement making, we know that potentially there is going to be aspects around how we work through risks and rewards. Also around agreement making too, and around the concept of what is fair. There's potential frustrations or tension points within our audiences around different concept of what fair is. So we really need to unpack the behavior, the mindset, the perceptions out there, and really address our engagements around these three core parts. For industry with frustrations, potentially the frustration that we're hearing is that where do we go to for advice in this space around how we engage? So the more that we can design around hearing this, the better when it comes to implementation. I just want to raise one thing in this aspect of fumbling. So the report goes into a little bit of this fumbling approach, and what we say is that there is going to be a capacity fumbling where you're not going to know everything straight away. You're going to learn, but what also can raise frustrations is that you can actually say, you can actually stop progression because you're intentionally fumbling without actually working through a progressive path to actually go through an improvement or the next phase. So fully understand about your learning, about how you fumble, but then it can also cause frustrations if there is an intentional fumbling that you're not actually working through the next phase of it. So I just want to raise that. I think that's important to clarify to the audience. And the more that we discuss these three key things, the more that we're going to learn in this space, the more that we're going to surface the tension points and potentially this topic too around the elephants in the room that we need to work through. It's not straightforward in this space about how we set up agreements, but we need to raise them key topics that often don't fully get explored. Next point, next slide, please. So we know alongside the opportunity, there is often the challenges with partnering. So if we go to the next slide, please, is that what we're trying to do with this framework is we're trying to bridge, this is sort of like a simplified way, trying to bridge the opportunity with the challenges, because if we don't, we're not going to get to our end outcome of a partnership or a workable partnership going forward. So this is where the framework is trying to position. I'm not trying to say to the audience that the framework delivers on that. I want to recognize that within our audience today, we're potentially going to have people that sit in this bridging space. We're going to have our cultural navigators that help to navigate between First Nations and industry. We're going to potentially have ESG officers that sit within the industry space that are also trying to broker and build connections. Funding bodies that are investing in this space about how we build stronger partnerships. There's so many investment in the space that I want to recognize, but I feel that's where the framework sits, is in that bridging space that we're trying to do that. Because if we don't, we're not actually achieving our full benefits because the opportunity is not to its full potential. I just want to flag that to the audience about where the actual framework sits and to recognize a lot of people are working in this space. I think that's very important to do that. Next slide, please. So we know, so we've got a framework. Yeah, we've got its pillars, but we know to get the framework off the ground that there's going to be readiness components. There's going to be an implementation component. So what we try to do in the report is to flag that you can't just straight away jump to your framework. You've got to have a readiness path. And we didn't go through the report and all the readiness steps to progress, but let's just say a key way to build your readiness is, as I just mentioned, let's look at the fumbles. Let's look at the fears. Let's look at the frustrations, because that's how you're going to build your path to implementation, is to actually understand the behaviors, perceptions, the challenges. So we try to, when we designed our workshop, is to surface some of the groundwork that we need to invest in, to build in. So then when we go to execute the framework, that we're setting it up in the right footing to carry it forward. So it's important that we acknowledge there's going to be some readiness around. Next slide, please. Sorry. So how are we tracking? So as I mentioned, we try with our workshops to seek insight. So this is just a couple of the graphs that within the report. There's 20, there's 20, but let's just hone in a little bit about some of the questions we asked around how we're tracking. So this is a question. How much do you think the negotiated co-benefits is currently part of the corporate culture of the blue economy? So as you can see there, we're on a low pass. So what's that saying is that the culture of this negotiation of co-benefits in this, the audience here was from Australia, is that our path is we still got more work in that space. Yeah, to how to build that, to actually embed it. Okay. Next one, do you think a business case of competitive advantage would enable agreement making? So we did try to hone in this space of when you talk about co-benefits, some might say that you might hone in a little bit towards a concept of competitive advantage. So how do we achieve competitive advantage? It's through having the right conversations, but some would also argue that a business case would help you to unpack your full layers of competitive advantage in terms of the value proposition for First Nations and also for industry. So the audience is saying it's highly important that to build competitive advantage, we need to be discussing it and to understand what it looks like. So I think that's important, and that comes to implementation. If you want to achieve competitive advantage, to implement it, we need to be thinking about all the underpinning processes that will help. And a business case, as it seems, would be important to that. There's other factors too, but that was just a question we asked from the audience. So next slide. A key part too is that to build co-benefits, to build the competitive advantage, you really need to unpack this concept of what fairness is. So we try to, in the report, is to really hone in on what is fair. Because what's fair to me might be different to what's fair to you. So if we don't start to unpack what it is and what it looks like, we could be underachieving in terms of the full opportunities that we can create. So we developed the concept of this fairness yardstick. And the yardstick is based on several components: procedural fairness, distributive fairness, interactional fairness. Why this is important, as I tried to explain here, is that we can do really well with building our respectful communication with First Nations or vice versa. We can have good processes about how we step through the process, but that's only one component of how you achieve a fair process. We need to go to another layer of fairness, is about, is your resourcing divided fairly, equally across the space? So it also looks at another layer of your resourcing. So yes, we could be communicating respectfully, but are we actually sharing our resources? And then procedural fairness starts to bring in FPIC and consent, is that there's so many layers to fairness. It's about your ethical, equitable, and about also your interaction going forward. And I suppose it does slightly align to sustainable, but we can't just base fairness on one component. And the more that we can ask about how we build fairness and get the learnings from audience in terms of First Nation industry, the more we start to understand how we actually track towards what is fair. So again, ask a question of the audience. We ask, over the next 5 years, how much work is ahead for the blue economy industry sector consider and respond to fairness? As you can see there, it's high. Of the audience today, how often have we been engaged in a real depth conversation around what is fair? So I'm really hoping that in this space we start to unpack what it is from both sides, from both perspectives, First Nations and industry, and then we can carry that conversation forward. Next slide, please. Is that, so to balance risk and rewards, we have to actually work through the modes of fairness. So you can't get to your full mode of the full stretch of the fairness yardstick without understanding that there's still going to be risks to get there. People are going to ask questions around, yes, I would like to create the highest fairness yardstick as possible. Just say if that was the scenario, that people are really keen to set that benchmark high. We're going to go the highest. But we also know there's going to be questions around how do we achieve that? What's the risk there? What do we need to work through around how we distribute our resources? So I'm just also flagging that we've got to start having conversations is that there's often an uphill climb through risk that can come reward. So we're going to build our trust. And this figure on the right hand side is saying that it's not a straightforward journey. You're going to be trying to, with the different compasses that you have, like your framework and the spaces that we work in, you're trying to navigate your path. But what we're really trying to focus in on, see that at the top part, there's a star in that red part. That star represents your maximum co-benefits in this space. That's like your highest competitive advantage that you're trying to achieve. So as we track forward our journey and try to set our benchmark for fairness, that's the aim here, is are we actually reaching our maximum co-benefits? And what if we're not, how do we actually unlock the handbrake to that space of achieving our rewarding? There's so many ways to unlock it. The handbrake is that we need leaders in this space that are confident and happy to work through the rewards and risks. So that real risk leadership in this space and the ability to actually leverage the uncertainty, shifting from business as usual to that rewarding space. So next slide, please. So another key part is for agreement making is that it comes together through several ways. And this is just some way I'm going to step you through. That different parties are going to have initial awareness, perceptions. They're going to have past experiences. They're going to have different values. They're going to have different ways of approaching this agreement. They're going to ask for things around disclosure, what needs to be put on the table to discuss. It also needs to be conducted in a way where everyone feels comfortable through a facilitator. So many ways to actually weave it in. I'll just go to the next slide because it actually unpacks it a little bit more. Is that what this next slide is trying to do is that achieving an agreement is not straightforward. Is that we need to initially work through all the tension points. You know how I talked about the fears, is that there's going to be a little bit of divergence where there's going to be misassumptions, there's going to be perceptions at the beginning. We've got to put them on the table to discuss, and then hopefully through that, putting the table, asking questions, you're critical around readiness and implementation, setting up what is fair, building the right process that people are comfortable, and you're going to set up hopefully around building the right consensus framework. Is that bit by bit, you're starting to converge to an angle where you've got the right mechanisms around the centers and processes in terms of agreement, but it's not going to be a nice, straightforward process. I think this needs to be understood in this space is that, agreement making is not straightforward. There's going to be ups and downs, and we need to go the long term. There's actually a commitment space to actually work through the agreement and to carry it forward. The more that we understand divergence, emergence, convergence, and that also we understand that as we work at place, this journey here is going to be different for each community that we go through. They're going to be asking different questions. They're going to be asking for different incentives. They're going to have different slightly goalposts around what is maximum co-benefits. So this is, so we're going to be testing ourselves each time we work at place with different communities around any country that we work in. But it's a journey that we need to go on. Next slide, please. So now with this journey, while I'm on the topic of journey, I'll wait with Leslie. An important part of the project was developing a video that had key concepts in there around the importance of partnership and the importance of coming together to negotiate and set up that vision in this space. So I'll just, Leslie, you can just share this video. That would be grateful.
The increasing pace and scope of global ocean development requires ethical, fair, and sustainable actions. As different agendas intersect across our oceans, it's important that benefits are fairly distributed and Indigenous people have their rightful place within innovative industry partnerships.
How can we create innovation for our regions, in our waters, through working together. It's important that we leave no one behind in creating wealth and in creating sustainable policies, technologies, and opportunities to create new ways of engaging with food production and renewable energy.
Indigenous people maintain enduring, deep connections with the sea.
We go look for pippi shells on the beaches, and we teach our young ones what to get for food. Even the mangroves, we go in there to get fresh saltwater mussels, crabs.
As the directions of the blue economy evolve, a Trans-Tasman research project has been working on what mutually beneficial partnerships might look like, with a focus on improved ethical, equitable and environmental performance.
If we can work in with the environment that we're looking to create or develop wealth from, then that is something that is a win-win for both. Not only for the economy, but also for the people that follow.
Our research is aimed around changing transactional to transformational. With transactional, one way of viewing it is a hands-off approach, whereas transformational is actually how you work together. And a big part of transforming is having opportunity to bring people together, different thinking, different diversity of thought.
The research also highlights to blue economy industries the connection that Indigenous peoples have with sea country.
Yeah, our connection go way out. And we got sacred sites on the sea too,
The way our oceans and the blue economy are defined differs between groups and sectors, resulting in a range of expectations around responsible practices. For industry to strengthen its cultural integrity, it needs to build trust and earn its cultural legitimacy to operate. Agreed partnership pathways which deliver co-benefits need to be committed to.
A cultural licence is a really complex thing to develop. It can be anything from communities' rights to veto a project, and it can also be communities' consent for a business to work in their sea country. It could be communities' rights to be engaged or profit from onshore facilities. It can be a whole range of things. The cultural licence aspect of it is really about giving that power and decision making to communities over our future in the blue space.
The development of a cultural licence to operate framework means negotiations are navigated by deeper learnings on both sides, progressing agreements between First Nations and industry around principles of fair and mutual benefits.
As Indigenous people, we have the right to be part of their journey, not at the end as a user of a product, but at the beginning as a co-designer of that product.
Non-Indigenous organisations really need to understand that it's okay for them to not know. It's okay for them to give a bit of control over to Indigenous people, because in the end, our goals could align, and I think that's the most important part of the work that we're doing here, is to provide that space and platform for communities to leap off and to get there.
We would like to work with agencies, with the tourism industries, like to show them where there's sacred sites. It'll be real good if we can all work together as a team.
Ultimately, the blue economy can be a space of complementary visions, delivering advantages to Indigenous peoples and industry, respectfully working together.
Thanks. So where I'd like to pick up the conversation now, I just got a couple more slides and then we can open it up to any questions. Is that, so looking forward, so where can the cultural license operate framework be implemented? We often get questions because it's actually the framing for this is cultural license to operate in the blue economy. We get questions. So can this framework be applied on land as well? Yes, it can, because the pillars are applicable in the partnership space. So the message here is that the framework can be applied in a lot of different industries. You can see there, tourism, primary industries, renewables. We're seeing a whole lot of emerging industries that are developing. And when we start to develop the partnership framework, it'd be good to work out what are some of the underpinning principles and processes. So this is, the framework is hopefully providing guidance that could, be applicable to other industries as well, because the core part is that when you've got a cultural partnership pathway, that this framework helps to guide that as well. So next slide, please. So this, I've just got a couple more slides, is that a big part of the recommendations, if I'll just summarize it, is what we're trying to shift is just the concept of just set and conform to actually stretch and transform. So a lot of the recommendations is just trying to shift up the bar, trying to say, invest in different, as we see there, around meeting different standards. It's about mandating leadership performance. But also the very first recommendation is this, is that the project scoped a preliminary version of the framework. It actually needs to be tested. It needs to go through, are we setting it up right with the right implementation framework, so we can develop the strong cultural partnership pathway. So a key recommendation is let's test this. Let's start to understand all the readiness components and how we implement it, and hear more feedback in terms of what are some of the key challenges that we need to step forward. But again, the recommendations, I feel as though, is aligned to this. I mentioned around tracking to that brightest North Star, that red star up here, is that as we track forward, we want to make sure that we're on the right path for our maximum co-benefits. First, we need to understand the whole space of what co-benefits are, and the diagram on the right talks some layers around what co-benefits could be. It can be around employment. It also can be around having joint parts in the business, unpacking this competitive advantage and setting up a right business case. So we really need to keep our eye on achieving our maximum co-benefits. That will help First Nations industry if we track forward with achieving maximum co-benefit for both parties. Again, that's what this bottom part is symbolizing, is about achieving that brightest North Star. So that's probably how I'm going to leave it, if we keep our eye on that going forward and how we actually get there, and keep asking questions about how we deliver to that brightest North Star of maximum co-benefits. One last slide. Also, that we work in this space. We can see we've got our audience members, is that there's lots of progressive work in this space. So I want to give a shout out to upcoming events that are working in this space, helping to develop it going forward. So we've got the Australian Sea Country Conference coming up, Larrakia up in Darwin in September. We've got AMSA again, good conversations around the marine space and industry, and also the upcoming International Conference on Ocean Energy. So for me, just keep building the dialogue, keep building our conversations, hone in on our principles and practices, but keep our efforts going forward. So I'll stop there. I think there's one slide about my contact details, but it's in the report, but we might open it up for any, should we do that, Greg? Open it up for any questions? Cool.
That's great, Cass. Thank you so much for that. So a couple of things immediately leapt out for me. One is I absolutely loved those key messages that you shared early on, because they used real language to sort of cut through. And I also love that learning around fumbles, fears and frustrations, because I think in these sorts of areas, people can often have an almost pathological fear of getting it wrong. And so instead of trying and getting it wrong, sometimes it's safer just not to try. So I think it's brilliant that you've talked about that. So look, a number of questions coming online. Those who are watching, please pose them. One thing that I wanted to ask is, I thought it was really interesting in that video where there was that comment from one person about connection to ocean extending beyond the coastline. And so my sense as someone new into the blue economy space sort of 4 or 5 years ago is the conversation at that stage was about First Nations connection to land and the coast. And when you started to have a conversation beyond the coast, quite often people sort of looked at me quizzically. And one of the things that I've learned through your work is many of the communities that you work with and many Indigenous people in Australia, they don't distinguish between coastline and not coastline. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about that, about what that connection to water beyond the land looks like and where it begins and ends or doesn't begin and end.
No, it's a good question around where it does. So there's often an assumption that the extent of connection either goes out beyond, hits the border or closer. We really need to understand that in our country, sea level rise, the connection extended out, and in different parts, that connection, given the geography of your landscape, can extend way out. And so we need to be asking the tradition owners around your connection to offshore. We need to break down the assumption that there's a line here and that's where it is. No, ask the tradition owners. We're seeing more and more studies. We're sitting down with tradition owners to actually understand the extent of the connection offshore and to actually unpack that often misassumption that it's a line out there and we just go to that. So and also the misassumption that's all going to be different across our country and in other countries too, given geography around how far. But the main thing is to sit down with communities, ask that question around your connection to offshore environments, and that's and to respect that. So I think it's important. So main message is can't just make that misassumption that it's just a line and sea country is just here. No, it extends out.
So that's great, thank you. And I wonder if that's so. There's a question that a number of people that have voted for, which is about how do we ensure that we have alignment in language and understanding, and how do we bridge the cultural gap? And I think one of the things that I'm hearing from you is. There might be that misalignment, but one of the ways you start to bridge that cultural gap is you ask. You ask about connection. You ask about what is that ongoing connection? What are the storylines? Is that right? Is that your advice?
Yeah, I think it's right. So as I talked about with the framework, to actually implement it, we need to get the right readiness. And I do think we need to be asking the right critical questions. And there's so many critical questions that we can ask in this space, but the main thing is that we actually ask. It can be from any space around offshore, near shore, around questions around the right cultural authority that I need to go through. So it is a step-by-step process, but I think, as you just mentioned, a good one too is that often with the fear component is that fear and fumbling go together. It's when you overshoot that and you don't ask and you just make a straight assumption. So I think there's sometimes more respect earned because you actually ask and you're willing to step through and listen. It's when you shoot forward and you just go you make an assumption. So I think they go a little bit in balance. Is this fear of not doing it right because you don't want to look potentially that you're actually fumbling, but I think there is respect if you actually ask questions respectfully.
That's great, Cass, thank you. You talked about the applicability of this framework on land, at sea, in different sectors. I'm interested because I know that you're very strong on place, and of course Australia is comprised of so many different places, as is New Zealand, and there's huge diversity of culture across the Australian First Nations community and across New Zealand. So I guess one of the obvious questions for me is the cultural license framework, given that I'm going to cultures within cultures across the country potentially, do you think the framework holds up in different places as well as in different sectors?
I think it does, because it's at place, it's with the community, and some will say clan level, but actually positioning it means you can take it, I feel, to different countries, because it's guiding you to say you need to work with the right cultural authority at your local area. And sometimes that can be a little bit complex in terms of it could be potentially have multiple groups that you might need to negotiate with, but actually positioning it at place means this framework, is directing the conversations around aspirations, around your vision of co-benefits at that place. So I feel as though that's why it can have its place within land, sea, and different environments, because it is positioning there. Also, it's around understanding that when you get to agreement making, I said at place, is that you're going to have different diverging, converging components that need to be discussed. So some groups potentially have engaged with agreement making before, so they might, so they're comfortable, might be a little bit more comfortable with the process, but other groups might not. So that everyone's going to go on a different journey. We can't just be locked into a single approach. Is that there's going to be differences as we work at place, and I do think that differences is going to unfold in the agreement making process in terms of what's important for some groups to discuss and their experiences potentially with working with industry first. In the past, if they've had different experiences, that journey with agreement making can go on a different trajectory to another. So the more that we understand that there's going to be diversity, and the main thing is that the pathway that we end up towards, that's what's called you can go a pathway. It's not going to be, each group's going to have a different pathway. They're going to have a different vision for the benefits. Is that integral to it? It's just the commitment to see that pathway get set up and to carry it through. The pathway might be different, but it is actually in the commitment space to see that that's integral to the process.
Thanks, Cass. That's fantastic. I want to sort of pose a double-barreled question, picking up some themes that are coming through. So the first, and I don't think this is confined to agreement making at sea. This is certainly the experience on land too, which is, okay, well, I'm interested in exploring the potential of an area. How do I work out who to talk to? Who are the right people to speak with? And then when I identify the right people to partner with or speak with, how do I make sure I don't burn them out? Because you've just talked about the negotiation process and the building of a relationship. And I imagine in, for example, a small, relatively remote community, if there's two or three people that are kind of the spokespeople of choice, or there's one organization with limited resources that it's the organization of choice, how do you avoid burning them out by then, waking up going, okay, well, there's 7 different organizations I'm going to see today. So 2 questions there. How do we identify the right people or organizations? And what can we do to make it easier for them to engage us so they don't burn out?
No, good question. So this come up within our discussions and even within our workshops around a cultural navigator, in terms of there might be someone key in the organization that is willing to put their hand up, to be the in-between. We talked about the bridging, the opportunity, the challenges. A navigator, if they're up for it, is about being that middle ground between the community and industry to help navigate that forward. So we need to invest in that area. We need to, we burn individuals out because they're juggling multiple things. But if you actually go out and if they're willing, it's up to the individual. If they want to play a part, the individual can come from the community. If communities agree also, if there's key learnings or another cultural navigator from another area that's got skills on that, and the community sees that there could be value that they bring it across into theirs in terms of that negotiation piece, is that, but the main thing, we need to invest in it right so that an individual feels like they've got the right timing, resourcing to commit to the space of actually talking through the process and potentially brokering that going forward. So that's one mechanism around, and let's put it on the table around what in the implementation. Let's just not say that's one. There could be others key things that work in the space that have been effective in the past that we can bring forward. Maybe there's not a role, maybe there's other components around, it could be a governance team or a set of elders that want to be involved in the conversation between them and First Nations. So let's not locked into one, but let's talk it through around how we actually set up that negotiation piece, around how we can navigate it forward. The more we can talk it through in the concepts about what it is, the more that we can help hopefully guide that in between space going forward.
Thank you. That's great. So I want to change tack again and pick up an issue's come up. And this is a bit of the where to from here. So congratulations, you've just won an election. You're Prime Minister for the day. You've got the cultural license to operate. Is it something that you would want to require industries to demonstrate they'd operated within, or is it something that you aspire for industries to actively take up with First Nations communities and embrace?
Yeah. So regardless, I don't think it comes down to your title. So if I was Prime Minister or not, it's just around it's between the two groups. It's between the First Nation and industry working out, do they want to come together? Do they agree on the space of co-benefit? So it's not about individual title. It's around, are we equipping the right conversations and process so everyone feel comfortable to carry it forward? So I would hope, it's not the title, but if I was Prime Minister, it's about investing in the area so that we're actually building the right leveraging and benefit space that everyone's feeling as though they're getting, they're actually getting the benefits and rewards from it. So if I was promised, it wouldn't be about the role, it'd be actually investing in this space so we can see more stronger, ethical, equitable, sustainable relationships going forward. I'll just be trying to fill in as much as I can with bridging the opportunity and the challenges, really understanding that space. But at the end of the day, the conversation at place is between the groups. We just need to, if we can, help to guide it. What do we need to think about in terms of capacity building, in terms around, have we got the right framing and just some guiding pillars? Yeah, that's what I step back and let them, the conversations. We just hope we're guiding them forward in the right way.
Oh, I think that's super insightful, because what I hear you talking about is invest in building capability and culture over time if you want it to be sustainable, as opposed to forcing somebody to do it to comply.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to go down this topic, but in the workshop we address this. What's gonna be the incentives that help the partnership? Is it around incentives or is it around compliance? The carrot and the stick. I don't want to go down too deep, but it's in the report around what actually works more. Is it around your incentives, around your co-benefits, around your competitive advantage, or is it that stick of regulation? You know what the group was saying? It's a combination of both. You would try to set up your incentives right, so it's just a natural progression. You're not coming along with your hand coming down. You want it, but we also know sometimes we might need a little bit of encouragement with that, to push it forward. So so let's understand that space a little bit more around the right environment for it, incentives and the carrot and the stick. And the message from the audience, sometimes we need a combination of both, because it's not always going to be effective one mechanism.
And that, Cass, that, you talk a lot about, this is not about transactions. This is about collaborative relationships over time where all parties benefit. So did you see any examples of that as you moved through, where you thought, oh, that's not perfect, but actually that's not a bad example of this emphasis on co-benefits and partnership over time as opposed to transaction?
Sorry, no, good question. Oh, my dog, sorry. So in that space of, is that the examples, this is what I say with examples. I try not to present best case examples, because I don't actually know if the integrity has been earned. So it's so hard to know. And so you want to go through your process of the earning process. Transformational is how you get your legitimacy, how you get your agreement with both parties coming together. So when you read the literature and when you see is that you often hear, that there's been steps forward, but we really need to unpack around, has that been earned in the right process and given the right legitimacy? So that's why so let's just unpack, about how we would step there, but I am mindful. So that's why the workshop's heavily focused in on the insights and the lessons learned, not so much around, there would be key good steps forward. I would just want to make sure that they're grounded and actually earning it and the communities are happy. And sometimes you don't really know from the literature around if it's earned. That's why if you've got a framework, you've actually got to earned it, it's legitimized, you've got it gives you a little bit more confident that the community is happy with it. The agreement has come together. And I'm assuming in other spaces with agreement, you assume both parties are happy. Okay, but the hardest thing to know is, has the full maximum co-benefits been achieved in the agreement making process? That's what's hard to know when you read the literature, when you read agreement making, because sometimes the information is kept confidential. We don't actually know if full benefits have been achieved. And that's what we need to have conversations around. Are we actually hitting for both parties around what that is? Otherwise, we're actually, we're not actually getting to that star. So if you keep talking more around, are we hitting our maximum? Then I'll be happy to talk about key positives, because we know it's still good to say we're progressing forward. Let's celebrate that, but let's also celebrate when we actually have got to that maximum co-benefits, that real competitive advantage, which, and when we know
That's fantastic, Cass. So I've probably got time for one more question. And my question is really, it's about the extent to which industry partners see benefit being beyond consent. So you've talked about co-benefit, and you've talked about partnership over time. In your experience, are the industries that are partnering with First Nations communities, are they seeing over time, are they understanding that there's much more benefit for them than simply getting approval to proceed? And what does that look like to them?
Yeah, for sure. So one concept that probably picks on that is this fairness yardstick. So remember, ethical, getting consent covers off with your procedural process. But then we go to the next layers now of it being equitable. So in terms of how we actually distributing our resourcing, our framing, so that everyone is happy that it's actually in a fair way. So yes, it's just, so that's what we need to understand, that the fairness yardstick and how we're setting our benchmark, we've got multiple pillars that we need to understand, because otherwise if we don't, you know what I'm going to say, we're not hitting our maximum co-benefits, we're not actually getting there. Because yes, it's very important that we have consent. It is core to our process, but it's also core that it's got equitable processes going forward too, is that we're actually sharing the space, we're dividing the pie in a fair way through proper conversations around what that looks like. So I think that it'd be good if that was that conversation was understood a little bit more, so we're actually setting our full benchmark around what is
Cass, thank you, that's been brilliant. This gives me an opportunity to thank you publicly on behalf of the CRC too, for the work that you've led, because not only do I think this makes a big contribution to the way we think about the blue economy in future in and around Australia and the other nations that we work with, but within the CRC itself, this has changed over the time the way we see our work, the way we see our responsibility, the way we value perspectives, the language we use, the research that we do. So it's already just the process of going through it, I think, has made a very significant contribution to the debate. So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I want to thank for the opportunity. I want to thank for the audience for listening in. Yeah, hopefully you know how to reach me, but I also do want to apologise. So normally I would always go to work to give presentations, but I had a meeting on in town, so it was a lot easier for me to come home. So I apologise about my dogs barking in the background. I know, yeah, so apologies for that, but normally I would go to work, but it was just a lot more convenient with this in town. But I appreciate that, yeah, opportunity. I appreciate the support of the Blue Economy with the support through key people within the Blue Economy, also supporting through their collaborative leadership. And again, just want to thank my team members and to other Indigenous members, industry that were a part of this process. A shout out to my fellow colleagues in this space for your involvement, insight shared, for the external reviewers that helped also give critical feedback. So thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Cass. And for those who are still online, the recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days on our website. And you can also check out CRC events page for information on any upcoming webinars and events you might be interested in. So with that, I say good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again, Cass.
Thank you.